The profound silence that fell over Heritage Heights was deafening, a sudden, unnerving quiet that replaced the usual hum of sprinklers and the gentle gurgle of unseen water pipes. Inside his sunlit kitchen, Alex took a slow sip of his iced tea, the condensation cool against his fingers. He watched the digital clock on the microwave flip to 3 p.m. Precisely on schedule. He pictured it, the exact moment the last drop of water had sputtered from 1,000 faucets across the neighborhood, the collective gasp, the confused murmurs turning to bewildered shouts. He knew the chaos was already brewing, a tempest of inconvenience ready to burst. He knew because he was the one who had unleashed it. He had just bought the entire water supply for Heritage Heights and, with a few clicks of a mouse and a rather expensive legal document, had cut them off. The pipeline Deborah, the self-proclaimed empress of the Homeowners Association, had so brazenly laid across his unsuspecting land, now lay dormant, a useless plastic tube. He closed his eyes, a strange mix of vindication and apprehension churning within him. What would they do? What would she do? The very next sound was Deborah's angry scream, echoing across the perfectly manicured lawns, a sound that promised war. It all began with hope, a quiet dream of a fresh start. Alex had moved to Heritage Heights a little over a year ago, drawn by the promise of tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and a small, perfectly sized house with a patch of land he could call his own. After years of city living, the idea of a quiet cul-de-sac felt like a warm, inviting hug. He envisioned weekends spent tending to a small vegetable garden, evenings on his porch watching the sunset, and maybe, just maybe, making a few good friends. He wasn't looking for drama. He was looking for peace. His new home, a charming ranch-style house painted a pleasant shade of soft gray with white trim, sat on a generous corner lot. It had a sprawling backyard that sloped gently towards a line of mature oak trees, beyond which lay a sparsely used common area owned by the HOA. This common area was mostly wild grass, a patch of undeveloped land that acted as a natural buffer between his property and the next street over. Alex loved it. He saw deer sometimes, nibbling at the edges of the wild clover, and the chirping of crickets at night was a lullaby. It was perfect. His first few weeks were a blur of unpacking boxes, setting up furniture, and trying to learn the names of his new neighbors. Most were incredibly welcoming. There was Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly lady from across the street who brought him a freshly baked apple pie, and the young couple next door, Sarah and Tom, who offered to help him move his heavier furniture. Alex, always eager to connect, reciprocated their kindness. He helped Mrs. Henderson carry her groceries, chatted with Sarah about her new baby, and even spent a Saturday morning helping Tom fix a leaky faucet in his garage. He believed in community, in looking out for each other. He believed a little bit of kindness could go a long way in making a neighborhood feel like home. Then there was Deborah, the self-appointed queen bee of the Heritage Heights HOA. She lived 3 houses down, in a meticulously kept colonial with a front yard that looked like it had been trimmed with nail scissors. Deborah was a woman of precise angles and unyielding opinions, always dressed in crisp, ironed clothes, even when simply checking her mail. She had a way of looking at people, a sharp, appraising gaze that seemed to size up not just your appearance, but your adherence to an unspoken code of conduct. Their first real interaction was less an introduction and more an inspection. A week after Alex moved in, as he was struggling to assemble a complex patio umbrella, Deborah appeared at the edge of his driveway. She wasn't smiling. "Mr. Miller, I presume?" she asked, her voice surprisingly loud and clear, cutting through the quiet afternoon. "Alex, please," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "And yes, that's me. Just wrestling with this beast." He gestured to the half-assembled umbrella, offering a friendly grin. Deborah didn't return the smile. Her eyes scanned his lawn, noting a few stray leaves near the curb. "Welcome to Heritage Heights, Alex. I'm Deborah Albright, head of our esteemed Homeowners Association." She paused, letting the title hang in the air like a royal decree. I've just been conducting my routine neighborhood walkthrough. Your house, while lovely, has a few minor discrepancies. Alex's friendly grin faltered. Oh? Discrepancies? Indeed. Your mailbox, for instance. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at his mailbox, which was a standard black model, no different from any other on the street. It's not the approved shade of charcoal gray. Our bylaws stipulate Heritage Heights signature charcoal. Yours appears to be a basic black. And your lawn, while adequately mown, has a few dandelions emerging. We pride ourselves on a weed-free environment. Alex blinked. He hadn't even finished unpacking his kitchen, and he was already getting a lecture on dandelion control. He took a deep breath. Well, I just moved in, Deborah. I haven't had a chance to get to the weeds yet. And the mailbox. I wasn't aware there was a specific shade of gray. I can look into it, of course. He tried to keep his voice pleasant, reasonable. Deborah's lips thinned. Ignorance of the bylaws, Alex, is no excuse. The rules are quite clear. They were included in your welcome packet. She stared at him, waiting. He remembered a thick envelope full of documents he'd vaguely skimmed, mostly about trash pickup schedules and pool hours. He hadn't realized it was a holy scripture. Right. The welcome packet. My apologies. I'll get right on it. She gave a curt nod, a sort of reluctant approval. See that you do. We like to maintain a certain standard here. Uniformity is key to preserving property values. With that, she turned and marched away, leaving Alex standing in his driveway, a half-assembled umbrella and a growing sense of unease. That initial encounter set the tone for what became a series of increasingly bizarre and petty complaints from Deborah. Every week, it seemed, a new rule was being enforced with the zeal of a zealous crusader. His garden gnomes, which he loved, were deemed not in keeping with the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. His tasteful string of fairy lights on his porch, which brought a warm glow to the evenings, were excessive and disruptive to the night sky's natural ambience. He even received a formal notice about the precise angle at which his trash cans should be placed on collection day. Alex, ever the peacemaker, tried to comply as best he could. He repainted his mailbox, reluctantly banished his garden gnomes to the garage, and took down the fairy lights. He even bought a special tool to ensure his trash cans were at the approved 45-degree angle. He didn't want trouble. He just wanted to enjoy his new home. He tried to see Deborah's perspective, that maybe she just wanted things to look nice, even if her methods were a bit rigid. He kept his conversations with her polite, even when he wanted to pull his hair out. He genuinely tried to be kind, to smile, to ask about her day, hoping that a little warmth might soften her edges. Sometimes, he thought he saw a flicker of something almost human in her eyes, a brief moment where her stern facade seemed to crack, but it was always fleeting. Then came the spring, and with it, the Great Backyard Cleanup Initiative. The HOA sent out a memo, demanding that all residents ensure their backyards, particularly those bordering common areas, were meticulously maintained. No unkempt vegetation, no debris, no unsightly growth, the memo declared. Alex, whose backyard was quite neat already, thought little of it. He trimmed his bushes, raked up stray leaves, and generally tidied up the gentle slope leading to the wild common area. One Tuesday morning, the tranquil peace of Heritage Heights was shattered by the roar of heavy machinery. Alex was enjoying his coffee on the back patio when a large excavator rumbled into the common area behind his house. He watched, puzzled, as it began to dig a deep, wide trench that seemed to run parallel to the very edge of his property line. He initially assumed it was some kind of drainage project or maybe landscaping for the common space. He even thought, well, at least Deborah's getting something done for the neighborhood. He watched them for a while, sipping his coffee, and then went about his day. The digging continued for several days. The trench grew longer and deeper, a raw, brown scar on the green landscape. Alex saw workers in hard hats, moving purposefully. He even saw Deborah herself, standing at the edge of the trench one afternoon, gesturing emphatically at the workers, her face a mask of determined supervision. He waved to her, but she just gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod and turned back to her discussion. He still didn't think much of it, beyond a mild curiosity. He assumed it was for the benefit of the community, something they'd announce at the next HOA meeting. Then, one afternoon, as he was deadheading some roses near his back fence, he noticed something different. The trench now had a massive, dark green pipe, thick as a tree trunk, being carefully lowered into it. It wasn't a small drainage pipe, this was industrial grade, the kind of pipe you'd see for major utilities. He watched, a knot forming in his stomach, as section after section of this enormous pipe was meticulously connected and then buried. The pipe, a thick, unyielding serpent of plastic, snaked directly through what he had always considered his forgotten corner of the property, a silent, brazen invasion of the peace he had sought. His heart pounded with a cold fury as he realized the truth. Deborah and the HOA were laying a pipeline, and a significant portion of it, without a single word to him, was running right through his land. The revelation of the pipe, a thick, green serpent buried in his ground without a whisper of permission, hit Alex like a physical blow. His initial shock quickly morphed into a simmering anger he rarely felt. This wasn't a misplaced trash can or a rogue dandelion, this was a blatant invasion of his property, a fundamental violation of his trust and the quiet peace he'd sought. He stood there, by the newly turned earth, staring at the barely concealed line of the pipeline. The workers had packed up for the day, leaving behind muddy tracks and the unsettling evidence of their clandestine work. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that made the unearthed dirt look even more sinister. His mind raced, replaying every interaction with Deborah, every petty rule, every dismissive glance. It all clicked into place. This was her, asserting control, extending her dominion without consequence. He had tried to be kind, to be understanding, but they had taken his politeness for weakness. The next morning, Alex woke with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't going to let this go. He put on a fresh shirt, squared his shoulders, and walked directly to Deborah Albright's house. Her lawn, as always, was immaculate, not a blade of grass out of place. He rang the doorbell, his finger pressing firmly, a stark contrast to the polite, hesitant rings he'd given before. Deborah answered, her expression already pinched, as if anticipating an annoyance. Her eyes, usually sharp and assessing, widened slightly when she saw the determined look on Alex's face. "Alex. Good morning. Is there an issue?" she asked, her voice laced with a familiar coolness. "Yes, Deborah, there's a significant issue," Alex stated, keeping his voice calm but firm. "I'm talking about the pipeline you've had laid through my property. The one that runs along the edge of my backyard." Deborah's perfect composure wavered for a split second, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, perhaps surprise, perhaps a hint of defiance. But it vanished quickly, replaced by her usual haughty demeanor. "Pipeline? Oh, that. That's merely a community infrastructure improvement, Alex. Nothing for you to concern yourself with. It's for the good of Heritage Heights, you see." She tried to wave it away with a dismissive hand gesture, as if discussing the weather. "Community improvement or not, Deborah, it's on my land," Alex retorted, his voice rising slightly despite his best efforts to keep it even. "You didn't ask for my permission. You didn't even inform me. That's a trespass. A major one." Deborah's chin went up. "It's on a portion of the common area that abuts your property. Technically, it's on HOA land, or at least land we have an easement for. There was no need to consult every single homeowner." "That's not true, Deborah," Alex countered, shaking his head. "I had a survey done when I bought the house. That corner of the property, where your workers were digging, is clearly within my boundary lines. I own that land. A faint flush crept up Deborah's neck. Well, perhaps there was a slight miscalculation. But it's done now, Alex. The pipe is in the ground. It's providing essential water services to a significant portion of the neighborhood. Removing it would be incredibly disruptive and costly. She folded her arms, as if that settled the matter. Her tone implied that his concerns were petty, irrelevant. Disruptive and costly for you, perhaps, Alex said, a new edge to his voice. But you chose to ignore due process. You chose to violate my property rights. I expect it to be removed, immediately. Deborah let out a short, humorless laugh. Removed? Don't be ridiculous, Alex. That pipeline serves over 30 homes. We can't simply dig it up because you have a sudden fit of pique about a few square feet of dirt. Her voice grew colder, sharper. Besides, as HOA president, I assure you, we have every right to ensure the efficient functioning of our community utilities. You're being overly dramatic. Dramatic? Alex felt a surge of indignation. You secretly laid a pipeline through my backyard. That's not dramatic, Deborah, that's illegal. And I assure you, if you don't arrange for its removal, I will be taking legal action. Deborah's eyes narrowed into slits. You wouldn't dare. Do you have any idea the kind of legal fees you'd incur fighting the HOA? We have a team of excellent lawyers on retainer. You'll be buried in paperwork and bills before you even get a court date. She smirked, clearly confident in her power. Think carefully, Alex. It's far easier to just let this go. Alex looked her straight in the eye. I've thought very carefully, Deborah. And I'm not letting this go. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in her doorway, her smug expression slowly replaced by one of disbelief, then dawning fury. He knew this was just the beginning of a long, difficult battle. He had offered kindness, sought understanding, and been met with disregard. Now, he knew he had to stand his ground. The days that followed were tense. Alex spent hours researching property law, local ordinances, and HOA regulations. He pulled out his original property survey, unfolded the large, detailed map, and traced the exact lines of his land. Sure enough, the portion where the pipeline ran was unequivocally his. He felt a grim satisfaction in knowing he was right. He started gathering documents, taking photos of the disturbed earth, and making notes of dates and times. He also tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. He continued to work on his garden, finding a small measure of peace among his growing vegetables and blooming flowers. He chatted with Mrs. Henderson, who always had a kind word and a fresh batch of cookies. He even helped Sarah and Tom troubleshoot a problem with their new smart thermostat. He didn't tell anyone about the pipeline yet. He didn't want to cause alarm or involve his neighbors in what was becoming a deeply personal fight. He wanted to handle this properly, methodically. He still believed in doing things the right way, even when others didn't. He knew that revealing too much too soon would only cause unnecessary gossip and division, and he wanted to keep the community intact, even if the HOA leadership was flawed. However, the constant presence of Deborah, or her enforcers, felt like a shadow. He'd receive passive-aggressive emails from the HOA general account, clearly drafted by Deborah, reminding him of various obscure rules. One day, he found a brightly colored violation notice tucked under his doormat, stating that his lawn was too green, implying he was using excessive water, even though he had a drought-tolerant lawn and only watered sparingly. Another time, his perfectly ordinary garden hose, left coiled neatly by his spigot, was cited for being not stored in an aesthetically pleasing manner. It was a constant barrage of minor annoyances, designed, he knew, to wear him down, to make him too tired or frustrated to fight the bigger battle. He ignored them all, focusing his energy on the pipeline. He refused to let the petty squabbles distract him from the real issue. His empathy extended to understanding that these were likely tactics to provoke a reaction, and he was determined not to give her the satisfaction. A week later, Alex received a thick, official-looking envelope from the HOA's legal firm. He opened it with a feeling of dread mixed with grim anticipation. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter. It claimed that his attempts to interfere with essential community infrastructure constituted harassment and threatened him with legal action for disrupting HOA operations and defamation if he continued to spread misinformation about the pipeline. The letter was filled with legal jargon designed to intimidate. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that the HOA had every right to the easement, that the pipeline was properly permitted, and that any claims he made to the contrary were baseless. It was a thinly veiled threat: back down, or face the full might of their legal team. Alex reread the letter, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't a rich man, he couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle. This was exactly what Deborah had warned him about. The letter even included a clause about him being responsible for the HOA's legal fees if he pursued the matter and lost. It was a classic bully tactic. For a moment, a wave of despair washed over him. Maybe he should just let it go. Maybe it wasn't worth the fight. The thought of losing his peace, his hard-earned savings, just for a strip of land, was daunting. He pictured the pipeline, silently snaking through his property, a constant reminder of how he had been wronged. He closed his eyes, remembering his initial hopes for a quiet, peaceful life in Heritage Heights. How quickly that dream had been shattered. He went to his study, pulled out his own property deeds, the official survey documents, and the detailed map that clearly showed his boundary lines. He spread them out on his desk, side by side with the HOA's legal letter. He stared at the lines, tracing them with his finger. There was no ambiguity. The pipeline was indeed on his land, cutting through his property line by a good several feet. He wasn't wrong. They were. Suddenly, a different kind of anger flared within him, not the impotent rage he'd felt when facing Deborah, but a cold, focused fury. They were trying to scare him off, to use their power and resources to crush him. He thought of all the little acts of kindness he'd offered to his neighbors, the way he genuinely tried to be a good part of the community. He thought of the simple justice he sought. He wasn't just fighting for his land, he was fighting for the principle of fairness, for the idea that people should be treated with respect, not like pawns in someone else's game. He looked at the legal letter again, then at his property survey. He took a deep breath, and a strange, determined calm settled over him. He picked up his phone. He wasn't going to call a lawyer. Not yet. He had another idea, a far more audacious and surprising one, born from his quiet research and his observations of the HOA's true motivations. He found the number he was looking for, a small local utility company, not the main one that supplied the rest of the town, but a lesser-known entity that managed specific water rights and smaller distribution networks. He had stumbled upon them during his research into local water sources. He took a deep breath and dialed. This was a gamble, a risky play that could either solve everything or plunge him into an even deeper abyss of conflict. He knew one thing for sure. He was done being pushed around. The phone call Alex made was deceptively simple, yet it set in motion a chain of events that would shake Heritage Heights to its core. He had reached out to Aquasource Solutions, a small, rather old-fashioned water utility company he'd found tucked away in the obscure corners of the county's public records. They specialized in private water rights, historical easements, and managing independent distribution networks. He remembered seeing an old, faded sign for them during one of his exploratory drives through the more rural parts of the county when he was first house hunting. He'd barely given it a thought then, but now, it felt like a hidden key. His conversation with a surprisingly friendly, if somewhat bewildered, man named Bob from Aquasource was long and detailed. Alex explained his situation carefully, describing the unauthorized pipeline, his property lines, and the HOA's defiant stance. Bob listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with a or an "I see." It turned out that Aquasource Solutions, due to a quirk of local history, held the original, centuries-old water rights to several underground springs and an old, disused well system that lay beneath a significant portion of what was now Heritage Heights, including, as fate would have it, the common area behind Alex's house. These rights predated the formation of the HOA by decades. The main town utility had simply built its infrastructure around these older, smaller rights, never bothering to acquire them fully, assuming they'd never be used. Nobody, least of all Deborah, had bothered to check. "So, what you're saying, son," Bob drawled, his voice crackly over the phone, "is that this here HOA of yours built a fancy new pipeline, tapping into a water source that, legally speaking, is actually supplied by a network of springs we've had the rights to since before your grandpappy was a twinkle in his daddy's eye?" "Precisely, Bob," Alex confirmed, a growing sense of disbelief and triumph bubbling inside him. "And they did it without any formal agreement or easement from you. They just hooked into what they thought was free water from a common area that apparently sits atop your historical water rights." Bob chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Well, I'll be bold, real bold. We haven't had anyone try to muscle in on those particular rights in, 50, 60 years. Mostly just private landowners needing a well dug, not an entire neighborhood." He paused. "Tell you what, Alex. We're a small outfit, but we take our history seriously. And our rights. What exactly are you looking to do here?" Alex laid out his audacious plan. He wanted to purchase the specific water rights associated with the springs and the old well system that the HOA's new pipeline was connected to. Not just the right to draw water, but the right to control the distribution from that specific source. Bob, after a few moments of stunned silence, finally agreed to look into it. The process was slow, involving dusty old deeds, obscure legal clauses, and several phone calls between Bob's equally ancient lawyers and Alex's increasingly intrigued new ones. But eventually, a path emerged. It was expensive, far more than Alex had anticipated, eating deeply into his savings, but it felt right. It felt like the only way to truly secure his peace and teach the HOA a lesson they wouldn't forget. While the wheels of this grand plan turned slowly in the background, life in Heritage Heights continued its awkward dance. Deborah, seemingly undeterred by Alex's defiance, intensified her campaign of petty harassments. His trash cans were now routinely inspected for infractions, resulting in new, ridiculous notices. One day, a bright orange sticker appeared on his recycling bin, stating, "Contents appear to contain unapproved materials." He opened it to find nothing but clean, sorted recycling. It was pure spite. Alex chose to ignore these low-level aggressions, but the pressure was undeniable. He felt like he was living under a microscope. He noticed Deborah's car driving slowly past his house more often, her head turning pointedly towards his property. Neighbors, sensing the tension, started to become more guarded around him. Sarah and Tom, his next-door neighbors, still friendly, seemed hesitant to engage in long conversations, their eyes darting nervously towards Deborah's house. Alex understood. Nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire of an HOA war, especially with Deborah. He kept his head down, focused on his garden, and waited. He knew his plan needed time to ripen, like a carefully cultivated fruit. He still greeted everyone with a smile, still offered a hand when he saw someone struggling. He believed that holding on to his own kindness, even in the face of their malice, was important. It was a silent act of defiance, a refusal to let their negativity corrupt his spirit. The extreme event that followed came not from Deborah's usual playbook of petty rules, but from an entirely unexpected direction, and it struck a far deeper chord of human vulnerability. It happened on a sweltering Saturday afternoon, one of those days where the air hung heavy and still, promising a storm that never quite broke. Alex was inside, enjoying the cool blast of his air conditioning, when he heard a frantic knocking at his front door. It wasn't the polite rap of a neighbor, but a desperate, pounding series of blows. He rushed to open it and found Sarah, his next-door neighbor, on his porch. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, and her usually cheerful eyes were wide with panic. She was holding her toddler, Lily, tightly against her chest. Lily, usually a bright and bubbly child, was whimpering, her small face flushed and red. "Alex. Oh, Alex, please, you have to help us." Sarah gasped, her voice hoarse with fear. "It's Lily. She's got a fever, a really bad one, and our air conditioning just went out. The whole house is boiling hot, and we can't get it to work." Alex's heart instantly went out to them. He knew how quickly a high fever could escalate in a small child, especially in such intense heat. Come in immediately," he urged, stepping aside. He led them into his living room, where the cool air was a welcome relief. "Get her on the couch. Do you have a thermometer?" Sarah nodded, fumbling in her bag. "Yes, it's 104 degrees, Alex. I tried calling the HVAC company, but they said they can't get anyone out until Monday at the earliest. And Tom's out of town on business until tomorrow night. I don't know what to do." Her voice broke, tears streaming down her face. Lily let out a weak cry, stirring restlessly in her mother's arms. Her little forehead felt burning hot to the touch. Alex knew immediate action was needed. "Okay, Sarah, deep breaths. We need to cool her down. Do you have any children's fever medicine? We also need to get some cool washcloths on her." "I gave her some Tylenol," Sarah whimpered, "but it's not bringing it down fast enough." Alex quickly moved into action. He grabbed a bowl of cool water and several clean washcloths from his bathroom. "Here, let's put these on her forehead, her wrists, her ankles. It'll help bring her temperature down." He gently applied a cool cloth to Lily's forehead, his touch as comforting as he could make it. "Don't worry, Sarah, we'll get through this. Your air conditioning is out, but ours is working perfectly. You and Lily can stay here as long as you need to. We'll make sure she's comfortable and safe." Sarah looked at him, gratitude shining through her tears. "Oh, Alex, thank you. Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver." For the next few hours, Alex became an impromptu nurse. He kept fresh, cool cloths on Lily, offered her sips of water, and helped Sarah keep her calm. He told stories, made funny faces, and did everything he could to distract the sick child. He even called his own doctor, describing Lily's symptoms, and got advice on how to manage the fever until Tom returned, or they could get her to an urgent care clinic if her temperature didn't respond. He brought out his softest blankets and pillows, set up a comfortable nest on his sofa, and made sure Sarah had everything she needed. As the sun began to set, Lily's fever slowly, thankfully, started to recede. She finally drifted off to sleep, her breathing becoming more even. Sarah, exhausted but relieved, slumped against the cushions, watching her daughter. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Alex," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Our house was just unbearable. If we'd had to stay there. I was so scared." "Don't even think about it, Sarah," Alex said gently. "That's what neighbors are for. We look out for each other." He genuinely meant it. In that moment, the petty squabbles with Deborah and the HOA faded into insignificance. All that mattered was helping a child in need, being there for a neighbor in crisis. This was the kind of community he had hoped for, the true spirit of living together. He had opened his home, shared his resources, and offered comfort, without a second thought. But then, as the moon began to rise, a new sound cut through the quiet night. It wasn't the sound of an approaching storm, nor the hum of emergency services. It was the distinct, unmistakable thud of large pipes being dropped, followed by the metallic clang of tools. Alex walked to his back window and peered out. Under the glow of portable work lights, a team of workers, unfamiliar to him, were back at the common area, just beyond his property line. They weren't repairing anything. They were digging a new trench, closer to the community pool, and installing more pipe. Not just any pipe, but pipe that looked remarkably similar to the large, green one already buried on his land. And this time, they were clearly rushing, working under the cover of darkness, almost as if they were trying to finish something before anyone could object. He watched, his brow furrowed, as Deborah's car slowly drove by, pausing briefly before continuing on, a clear sign of her nocturnal supervision. They were expanding their unauthorized water system, emboldened by their belief that he wouldn't fight back, or perhaps, in a dark twist of irony, spurred on by the sudden, widespread air conditioning outages hitting the community due to the sweltering heat, which they likely blamed on inadequate water pressure from the existing municipal supply. The quiet act of kindness he had just extended to Sarah suddenly felt juxtaposed against this brazen, escalating act of aggression. The stakes, he realized, had just been raised. They weren't just trespassing anymore, they were building an entire shadow utility, right under his nose, right next to the very area where a child had just suffered from the heat, relying on his kindness to survive. The sight of the workers digging new trenches under the shroud of night, laying even more of that thick, green pipe, ignited a cold, hard resolve within Alex. It wasn't just trespass anymore, it was an expansion of their brazen disregard, a clear message that Deborah and the HOA felt invincible. They were building an entire shadow utility, emboldened by their assumption that he would buckle under pressure. The kindness he had just shown to Sarah and Lily felt like a stark contrast to the audacious actions unfolding in his backyard. His empathy was being tested, pushed to its limits. He knew he had to act, and his audacious plan, simmering in the background, was now ready to boil over. The next morning, the legal documents from Aquasource Solutions finally arrived. They were even thicker than the HOA's cease and desist letter, filled with arcane legal language, but the core message was crystal clear. Alex now held the absolute and indisputable water rights to the specific springs and the old well network that supplied the HOA's illicit pipeline. He had poured a significant portion of his savings into this, but holding those papers in his hand, feeling the weight of their legality, he knew it was worth every penny. He wasn't just a homeowner with a grievance, he was now the rightful owner of their very lifeblood. He spent the day carefully reviewing every clause, every legal definition. He learned about riparian rights, prior appropriation, and easements by prescription, terms that had been abstract just weeks ago but now held immense power. He understood that while the HOA had laid their pipes, they had no legal claim to the water itself from that specific source. It was like building a beautiful straw, only for someone else to own the drink. He thought about the desperation in Sarah's eyes the night before, and the vulnerability of little Lily. He knew the HOA, in its pursuit of power and control, had created a system that was not only illegal but potentially unstable, especially if it was the only source of water they were relying on for emergency services, like dealing with air conditioning failures. The thought solidified his resolve. This wasn't just about him anymore. Life in Heritage Heights continued its bizarre course, with Deborah's petty reign tightening its grip. After the heat wave and the widespread AC failures, the HOA sent out yet another memo, this one vaguely hinting at future infrastructure resilience projects and urging residents to conserve water from the municipal supply, implying that their secret pipeline was already helping ease the burden. It was a subtle, insidious way of justifying their actions without admitting what they had done. Alex, meanwhile, began noticing more frequent trucks near the common area, and even more digging equipment arriving. They weren't just expanding, they were reinforcing, burying more lines, clearly making the secret system a more permanent fixture. He observed Deborah's car parked near the construction site more frequently, her stern profile visible behind the tinted windows, overseeing her illicit empire. The neighborhood, too, seemed to be holding its breath. The unspoken tension was palpable. People would lower their voices when speaking near his fence, or quickly change the subject if he approached. It was clear that Deborah's influence, and fear of her retribution, had a chilling effect on open communication. Alex still offered friendly waves, still helped Mrs. Henderson with her garden, still exchanged pleasantries with Sarah and Tom, but he kept his own counsel. He was preparing for a grand reveal, not a slow burn of gossip and speculation. One particularly sticky afternoon, as Alex was watering his newly planted basil, he saw Mrs. Henderson slowly making her way across her lawn, leaning heavily on her walking cane. She looked frail and tired in the heat. Without a second thought, Alex dropped his watering can and walked over to her. "Mrs. Henderson, are you all right? Can I help you with anything?" She smiled weakly. "Oh, Alex, dear. Just trying to water my hydrangeas. But the water pressure, it's been so low lately. Barely a trickle from the hose. And my sprinklers aren't working right either. I don't know what's happening." She sighed, looking frustrated. Alex's mind immediately connected the dots. The new pipeline, the increased usage by the HOA to offset municipal shortages, the sheer volume of water being diverted. It was undoubtedly affecting the pressure for everyone else, including the vulnerable like Mrs. Henderson. The HOA was putting their infrastructure resilience project ahead of the basic needs of individual residents. His heart ached for her struggle. "Let me take care of that for you, Mrs. Henderson," he insisted gently, taking the hose from her hand. He spent the next 20 minutes carefully watering her thirsty hydrangeas, making sure they got enough to drink despite the weak pressure. He then checked her sprinkler system, realizing it was connected to the same municipal line as everyone else, and thus subject to the same diminishing pressure. He quietly advised her to water by hand for now, promising to look into the general water issue for the neighborhood. He wanted to offer reassurance, but he couldn't yet reveal the full scope of what was happening. This small act of service, helping a struggling neighbor, reinforced his determination to bring the truth to light, not just for his own vindication, but for the well-being of the entire community. He wasn't just a victim, he could be a protector. The extreme event that finally triggered Alex's decision to move his plan into action came swiftly and brutally. It was a hot Friday evening, the air thick with the promise of a distant thunderstorm. Alex was enjoying a quiet dinner when the lights flickered, then died. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the chirping of crickets. A neighborhood-wide power outage. Not uncommon in Heritage Heights during peak summer, but always inconvenient. He grabbed a flashlight and checked his phone. No cell service. Great. He stepped onto his porch. Already, he could hear the frustrated shouts of neighbors, the banging of garage doors, and the worried cries of children. He saw flashlights bobbing across the street. The air grew heavier, hotter. He went back inside to grab a battery-powered fan and some bottled water. As he did, he heard a new, disturbing sound from next door. Sarah's panicked cries. He rushed over. "Sarah? Are you okay?" he called out, shining his flashlight towards her house. "Alex. Oh, thank goodness," she cried, her voice trembling. "It's Lily again. Her fever's coming back, and the power's out, so no AC, no fans. And now the water's gone too. There's no water pressure at all. I can't even get her a cool washcloth, or give her any medicine with water." Alex froze. No water? During a power outage, the municipal water system sometimes experienced reduced pressure, but never a complete cutoff. He tried his own faucet. Nothing. Not a single drop. His mind reeled. If the municipal system was down, and the HOA had been diverting water through their secret pipeline, then where was that water going? Why wasn't that system working? He looked out towards the common area, towards the buried pipes. The faint glow of Deborah's house, powered by a large generator he could hear humming, cast an eerie light. He saw her, silhouetted in her window, a figure of calm amidst the chaos. He then saw a group of HOA board members, illuminated by portable lanterns, gathered near the newly installed pipes in the common area. They were speaking in hushed, urgent tones, pointing at something on the ground. It looked like a pump, a large, powerful pump, which they were now desperately trying to troubleshoot in the darkness. Then, a single, horrifying sentence from one of the HOA board members, spoken loud enough to carry in the still, hot air, reached Alex's ears. "The pump's fried. This whole section is dead. We relied too much on this bypass, and now with the municipal pressure dropping, we've got nothing to feed it." The realization slammed into Alex with the force of a physical blow. The HOA, in their arrogance, had built an entire alternative water supply for themselves, relying solely on this unauthorized pipeline, which they had pushed through his property, and then through other common areas. They had become dependent on it, perhaps even diverting water away from the regular municipal lines to feed their resilience system, causing the pressure drop Mrs. Henderson experienced. And now, during a widespread power outage, the pump for their secret pipeline had failed, leaving everyone, including the innocent, entirely without water. They had cut off their own nose to spite their face, and the entire neighborhood was paying the price. Including Lily, whose fever was rising again, with no way to cool her down. A cold, determined fury settled over Alex. He looked at the legal documents sitting on his kitchen counter, the ones confirming his ownership of the source. He looked at Sarah, her face etched with fear, desperately trying to comfort her whimpering child. He looked at Deborah's house, calmly lit by her generator, while the rest of the neighborhood suffered. He knew what he had to do. The time for subtle acts of kindness was over. The time for a decisive, shocking blow had arrived. He would give them water, yes, but on his terms. And they would learn exactly who held the real power over their supply. The power outage, the parched taps, and the sight of Deborah's HOA cronies desperately trying to revive their failed pump in the darkness, all while Lily suffered from a rising fever next door, hardened Alex's resolve. The time for waiting was over. The kindness he had extended to his neighbors, including Sarah and Mrs. Henderson, had only highlighted the HOA's blatant disregard for the community's well-being. Their secret pipeline, born of arrogance, had now become a source of crisis. He held the legal documents confirming his ownership of the water source, and a plan began to crystallize in his mind, a plan that was both daring and deeply satisfying. He wasn't just going to cut them off, he was going to make them understand, in the most direct way possible, the true cost of their deceit. The first step was a call to Aquasource Solutions. He explained the current emergency. The widespread power outage, the complete lack of water in Heritage Heights, and the failure of the HOA's unauthorized pipeline. Bob, the old man from Aquasource, listened intently. Alex then proposed activating his newly acquired water rights. He wanted Aquasource to connect the old well system, the one the HOA's pipeline was secretly drawing from, to a different distribution point. Not the main Heritage Heights network that the HOA controlled, but a small, independent tap at the very edge of his property, near where their unauthorized pipe entered his land. This tap would be for his exclusive use, but it would also serve as a very visible, very public symbol of his control. He wanted to be able to turn on his water, while the rest of the neighborhood remained dry, without revealing the full scope of his plan just yet. He wanted to give them a taste of what it felt like to be powerless, to be at the mercy of someone else's decisions. Bob, after a moment of consideration, agreed. He understood the historical significance of the water rights and the importance of asserting them. Within hours, a small Aquasource crew, discreetly operating under the cover of the continued power outage, arrived. They were quiet, efficient, and seemed to relish the clandestine nature of their work. They located the old well access point, which was surprisingly intact, and rerouted a small, direct line to a new, industrial-grade spigot and valve system near the property line where Deborah's pipeline entered his land. It was a temporary measure, a way for Alex to demonstrate his authority over the water flowing beneath their feet without immediately plunging the entire neighborhood into utter chaos. They even installed a small, silent pump that drew water directly from the Aquasource-controlled well, bypassing any connections to the HOA's compromised system. It was expensive, but for Alex, it was an investment in reclaiming his peace and upholding justice. As the Aquasource crew finished their work, the power flickered back on across Heritage Heights, bringing with it a collective sigh of relief. Lights blazed, refrigerators hummed, and the blessed sound of air conditioning units kicking back to life filled the air. But while the lights were on, the water remained stubbornly off for most of the neighborhood. Alex watched from his window as frustrated residents continued to struggle with dry taps. He saw Deborah and her HOA council still gathered by their broken pump, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and growing desperation. They had power, but no water, and the secret system they had invested so much in had failed them completely. Alex walked out to his newly installed spigot. He turned the valve. With a satisfying hiss, a strong, clear stream of water gushed forth. He filled a pitcher, then carried it next door to Sarah. She was still trying to comfort Lily, who was restless in the lingering heat. "Sarah, here," Alex said, handing her the cold pitcher. "Fresh water. You can get Lily some more medicine and cool her down." Sarah stared at the pitcher, then at Alex, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Water? Alex, where did you get water? Ours is still completely out." "Don't worry about it right now," Alex replied, offering a reassuring smile. "Just focus on Lily. Get her cooled down." He knew his neighbors would be curious, but he wanted the full impact of his actions to sink in for Deborah first. He wanted the questions to start swirling, the mystery to build. He went back to his spigot, filled a bucket, and brought it to Mrs. Henderson, who gratefully accepted it, tears of relief in her eyes. He helped her fill her kettle and a few bottles for drinking. He was giving water to those who truly needed it, directly, without the HOA's interference. This was his first, subtle move. The next few days were a strange blend of simmering tension and escalating confusion. With the power restored but water still largely absent across the neighborhood, the complaints to the HOA mounted. Deborah and her council were in full crisis mode. They blamed the municipal utility, then vague, unforeseen technical difficulties, then even implied that some residents were hoarding water. Meanwhile, Alex's house, and the few he quietly helped, had a steady, flowing supply. His garden flourished, his sprinklers ran, albeit sparingly. And the sound of running water from his hose could occasionally be heard. It was subtle, but it was there. And people noticed. Whispers started. How did Alex have water? Why was his house seemingly unaffected by the widespread outage? Was he somehow breaking the rules? Deborah, always quick to notice any deviation from her perceived norms, sent him yet another passive-aggressive email, hinting at unexplained water usage anomalies, and threatening an investigation into his property's utility connections. Alex simply deleted it. He knew the investigation would only lead her to the new spigot, and eventually, to the truth. And that was exactly what he wanted. He decided to continue his routine, outwardly calm, inwardly a whirlwind of anticipation. He worked in his garden, watered his plants, and occasionally ran a small, controlled trickle from the new spigot, just enough to be noticeable, but not ostentatious. He also began dropping subtle hints to a few trusted neighbors, like Sarah and Mrs. Henderson, about his own private well connection, a historical quirk of his property. He didn't reveal the whole truth, just enough to plant a seed of doubt about the HOA's narrative. He saw the questions in their eyes, the dawning realization that something wasn't quite right with Deborah's explanations. One afternoon, as Alex was raking leaves near his back fence, Deborah herself appeared, marching purposefully towards him, her face a thundercloud. She didn't even bother with a greeting. "Alex, I want to know about your water," she demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. You seem to have a perfectly normal supply, while the rest of Heritage Heights is struggling. How is that possible? Alex straightened up, meeting her gaze calmly. Well, Deborah, I guess some of us are just lucky. Or perhaps, some of us have unique historical connections. He gave her a small, enigmatic smile. Her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Are you hoarding water? Because that's a serious violation, Alex. Hoarding? Alex scoffed softly. No, Deborah. I'm simply using the water that is rightfully mine. The water that flows from the springs and wells on land that I own the rights to. The very same source, funnily enough, that your unauthorized pipeline is currently trying to tap into. He watched her face carefully, savoring the slow dawning of comprehension, then outright shock. Deborah's jaw dropped slightly. What? What nonsense are you spouting? Those are community resources. The HOA controls those water rights, she spluttered, her voice rising in pitch. Do you, Deborah? Alex asked, his voice deceptively mild. Have you actually checked the original deeds? The historical easements? Or did you just assume that because it was common land, you could do whatever you wanted with it? He paused, letting his words hang in the air. I've acquired those historical water rights, Deborah. Every single one of them, for the precise source your pipeline is connected to. It's all legally documented, filed with the county. I own the water. You own the pipe. But without the water flowing through it, your pipe is nothing but an expensive, useless piece of plastic. He watched her face turn from disbelief to furious crimson, her eyes widening with a sudden, horrible understanding. The tables had turned. She was trapped in her own web of deceit. The full force of Deborah's fury erupted like a volcano. The very next morning, a swarm of official-looking vehicles descended upon Heritage Heights. Not just Deborah's usual SUV, but several sedans marked with the HOA's legal firm logo, and even a county sheriff's department vehicle. They converged on Alex's property, a veritable army of suits and stern faces. Deborah, leading the charge, strode towards his front door, her face a mask of incandescent rage. She was no longer trying to be subtle or manipulative, she was outright hostile. Alex Miller. Open this door immediately, she shrieked, pounding on his solid oak door. You cannot do this. This is an outrage. You have illegally cut off the neighborhood's water supply. We demand you restore it at once. Her voice echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac, drawing curious, worried faces to windows and porches. Alex, who had been expecting this, opened the door calmly. He was dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, looking utterly unperturbed. He stepped onto his porch, facing the small, angry crowd. Good morning, Deborah, Alex said, his voice measured, completely devoid of fear. What seems to be the trouble? The trouble, Alex, is you. Deborah screamed, her finger jabbing accusingly at him. You have disconnected our water. You have stolen our resources. You are causing undue hardship to this entire community. These are our lawyers, and we will sue you into oblivion. One of the lawyers, a stern-faced woman in a dark suit, stepped forward. Mr. Miller, we have reason to believe you are interfering with Heritage Heights' essential utilities. This is a serious matter. We demand you cease and desist immediately and restore the community's water supply. Alex calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out a neatly folded stack of documents. He held them up, letting the morning sun glint off the official seals. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the tense silence, I have here the fully executed, legally binding documents confirming my ownership of the water rights to the springs and wells that the HOA's unauthorized pipeline is connected to. These rights predate your HOA by decades, and they are now, unequivocally, mine. Therefore, I haven't stolen anything. I simply chose to turn off my water supply, which you were illegally siphoning off my property, and which was feeding your broken, failed system." He paused, letting his words sink in. Deborah's face went from purple with rage to a sickly white. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. The sheriff's deputy, who had been observing quietly, took a step forward, his expression suddenly much more attentive. "So, the pipeline Deborah laid through my land," Alex continued, gesturing towards his backyard, "the one she tried to hide and then threatened me over, is now completely useless. It's a very expensive, very long, and very dry pipe. Because the water? The water is now mine. And I've cut them off." He looked directly at Deborah, a challenging glint in his eye. "Now, if you want your water back, Deborah, it's no longer a matter for the HOA. It's a matter for me. And perhaps, for the first time, you'll have to ask nicely." The finality in his voice was chilling, a powerful shift in control that left Deborah speechless, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, as the rest of the neighborhood watched, stunned. Deborah's face, usually a mask of unyielding control, was now a portrait of disbelief and dawning horror. The lawyers, initially confident, began shuffling their feet, their expressions turning grim as they processed Alex's calm, undeniable declaration. The sheriff's deputy, who had arrived expecting a simple neighborhood dispute, now looked at Deborah with a new, professional skepticism. The assembled neighbors, drawn by the commotion, murmured amongst themselves, their confusion slowly morphing into a potent cocktail of shock and dawning understanding. Alex had just dropped a bombshell, and the fallout was instantaneous and explosive. "This is outrageous. Preposterous. You can't possibly," Deborah stammered, her voice cracking, her carefully constructed authority crumbling around her. "I can, Deborah. And I have," Alex interrupted, his voice steady. He gestured to the sheriff's deputy. "Officer, I have all the documentation to prove legal ownership of these water rights. My property was trespassed upon, and now, the water flowing through the HOA's pipeline, which they built without proper easements, belongs to me. I simply chose to exercise my right to control my property and my resources." The deputy, a burly man named Officer Davis, stepped forward. "Ma'am, Mr. Miller appears to have legitimate claims here. This looks like a civil matter, but if what he says is true, your HOA may have committed a significant trespass and an unauthorized diversion of private resources." He looked at Deborah, his voice firm. "I'd advise you to have your legal team verify Mr. Miller's claims immediately." Deborah, for once, was speechless. Her lawyers, sensing the shift in the wind, pulled her aside, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. They knew a losing battle when they saw one, especially when their client had clearly overstepped. The scene on Alex's lawn remained tense. Neighbors, initially hesitant, started to whisper more openly. Mrs. Henderson, emboldened by Alex's stand, called out, "So that's why my hydrangeas were so thirsty, Deborah. You were stealing our water." Sarah, holding Lily, looked at Deborah with a mixture of anger and betrayal. The carefully maintained facade of Heritage Heights was cracking, revealing the raw resentment and distrust that Deborah's reign had fostered. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and community turmoil. Alex's phone rang off the hook. Lawyers, local news reporters, who had somehow caught wind of the water war, and even a few other HOAs seeking advice contacted him. He spent hours on the phone with his own legal team, who were now working tirelessly to formalize the arrangements with Aquasource and ensure every detail was watertight. Deborah, meanwhile, unleashed a furious but ultimately ineffective counter-campaign. She called emergency HOA meetings, trying to rally support, but the residents were too thirsty, too angry, and too aware of her past abuses to fall in line. The dry taps were a constant, undeniable reminder of her failure. The HOA's attorneys, faced with Alex's irrefutable documentation and the growing public relations nightmare, advised Deborah to negotiate. She initially refused, stubbornly clinging to her rapidly diminishing power. "I will not be blackmailed by a rogue homeowner," she'd reportedly fumed. But as days turned into a week, and the lack of water became a severe problem, toilets wouldn't flush, showers were impossible, gardens withered, and even the community pool began to look like a giant, stagnant puddle, the pressure on Deborah became unbearable. Residents started talking about mass resignations from the HOA, even forming a petition to remove her from her position. Some homeowners, desperate for water, even began to eye Alex's flowing spigot with a mixture of hope and resentment. During this time, Alex remained calm but unyielding. He continued to provide water to Sarah and Lily, and to Mrs. Henderson, always quietly, always out of sight of Deborah's watchful eye. He was firm but fair with his legal team, telling them he wanted a resolution that ensured the community got its water back, but only after proper apologies and assurances that the HOA would operate with transparency and respect for individual property rights. His personal empathy extended to understanding that cutting off everyone indefinitely was not the answer, but they needed to learn their lesson. The extreme event came in the form of a dramatic, public confrontation at an emergency HOA meeting. Deborah, under immense pressure, finally agreed to hold a general meeting to address the water crisis. The community hall was packed, simmering with frustration and anger. Deborah, looking visibly strained but still attempting to project an air of authority, stood at the podium. She launched into a long, rambling speech about unforeseen circumstances and complex utility issues, studiously avoiding any mention of Alex or his acquired water rights. She tried to deflect blame, implying it was a municipal problem, not an HOA one. But the residents weren't having it. One by one, they stood up, their voices filled with frustration. "Where's our water, Deborah? Why did our pump fail? Why does Alex Miller have water when we don't?" Finally, a tired-looking older gentleman named Mr. Peterson, who had lived in Heritage Heights since it was first built, slowly rose from his seat. "Deborah," he said, his voice surprisingly strong, "I've been here a long time. I remember when this HOA was about community, not control. And I know about the pipeline you laid, because I saw them working on it. And I heard about Alex's new water rights. Why are you lying to us? The dam broke." More residents started shouting questions, demanding answers. Deborah's face twisted into a snarl. "Silence. You are out of order. I will not have this insubordination." At that moment, Alex, who had been sitting quietly at the back, decided it was time. He walked to the front, holding a copy of his water rights deed high for all to see. A hush fell over the room as he approached the podium. Deborah tried to physically block him, her eyes spitting fire. "You are not recognized, Alex. Get out." But Alex gently but firmly moved past her. He stood tall before the microphone, his voice calm, clear, and resonant. "Deborah is right about one thing," he began, looking out at the anxious faces in the crowd. "This is about water. And about who controls it." He held up the deed. "As of 2 weeks ago, I legally acquired the water rights to the very springs and wells that the HOA's pipeline is connected to. These are centuries-old rights, officially recognized by the county. Your HOA built their pipeline through my land, without my permission, and connected it to a water source that they do not, and never did, own." Gasps rippled through the hall. Deborah let out a strangled cry. "When I tried to address this privately," Alex continued, his voice gaining strength, "I was met with threats and intimidation. I tried to be reasonable. I tried to be kind. But my attempts were dismissed. So, I took action. I bought the water. And I cut them off." He looked directly at Deborah, who now looked like a ghost. "The only water flowing through that pipeline right now is what I choose to allow. And I chose to cut off the supply to their system, because it was illegally diverting my water." He paused, letting the full weight of his revelation sink in. The room was silent, save for the rapid breathing of Deborah, who seemed on the verge of collapse. However, Alex continued, his tone softening slightly, I understand that many of you, my neighbors, have suffered innocently because of the HOA's actions. Sarah and Lily, Mrs. Henderson, and countless others. That was never my intention. My intention was to secure my property, to stand up for what is right, and to teach those in power a lesson about respect and transparency. He took a deep breath. Therefore, I have a proposal. I am willing to restore the water supply to the entire neighborhood, immediately. But on certain conditions. He looked at the shaken HOA lawyers, then directly at Deborah, whose eyes were wide with a desperate, fearful hope. First, Deborah Albright must resign as HOA president, effectively immediately, and be permanently barred from holding any future positions of authority within this HOA. Second, the HOA must issue a formal, written apology to me for the trespass and harassment, and acknowledge their wrongdoing in diverting private water resources. Third, new, transparent HOA board must be elected, one committed to ethical governance and respectful communication with all residents. And finally, a clear, legally binding agreement must be drawn up between myself and the new HOA, outlining the terms under which I will provide water from my source, ensuring fair distribution and proper maintenance. He looked out at the faces in the crowd, no longer angry, but stunned, then slowly, a growing sense of relief and quiet triumph. If these conditions are met, the water flows. If not, then Heritage Heights will remain a very dry neighborhood, and your lawyers will have a very long, very expensive battle on their hands. The hall erupted. Not in anger towards Alex, but in a groundswell of support. Calls for Deborah's immediate resignation filled the air. She stood there, trembling, defeated. Her lawyers, seeing the writing on the wall, quickly conferred with her, their gestures urgent and final. With a bitter, almost inaudible whisper, Deborah resigned. The meeting, which began in chaos, ended with a renewed sense of community, a common enemy defeated, and a pathway to reconciliation. Alex, the quiet homeowner who only wanted peace, had become the unlikely hero who brought the neighborhood back from the brink of dryness, and in doing so, taught them all a vital lesson about kindness, justice, and the true meaning of community. The water, now, was not just a utility, it was a symbol of freedom from tyranny.